If you aren't humble, whatever empathy you claim is false and probably results from some arrogance or the desire to control. But true empathy is rooted in humility and the understanding that there are many people with as much to contribute in life as you. And this week's opening quote comes from Anand Mahindra. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. And it's nice to be here again, folks. There seems to be a little bit of confusion with a couple of things I said at the start of last week's show. So just to clear that up, on last week's show, I said we have stopped the rollout of 5G in my area here on the Gold Coast. What I meant when I said that was we have stopped the rollout in my area here on the Gold Coast, not on the entire Gold Coast. A lot of people seem to have misconstrued that. We've just had success with one tower in the area where I live. We have most certainly not stopped the rollout of 5G on the Gold Coast. The battle has just begun, so please do not fall into any sense of complacency and think that we've made any real headway against the 5G battle here on the Gold Coast. We've just had this one victory, which is still a major victory, but it is just one victory in one area. And it's important that other people continue to pick up the torch and go with this and stop the rollout in their own areas. And if people want to get involved in that, what you could do is you could find the 5G Global site, I would say, on Facebook. I don't know whether there's a website, but 5G Global, contact Paul Seals and he may know someone in your area. He's kind of taken on the role of spearheading this, and good on him for doing so, because we certainly need someone to do it. But that would be the person to contact to find out what action you could take and who you may be able to contact in your own local area to push action through. So I just wanted to clarify that. Things certainly haven't slowed down in any way in Australia. We know with all the action that we're taking, things certainly haven't slowed down. Interesting, a bill that was just passed through Parliament the other day, a new financial bill, which sees the outlawing of any transactions over $10,000 with cash or Bitcoin. It used to be that you would have to declare any purchases that were $10,000 or over. Now it's got to the point that you have to declare any purchase that is $5,000 or over. And now they've pushed that even further and they have completely outlawed any purchases over $10,000. Doesn't matter whether you declare it or not. Once you get to $9,999, you can't go any higher than that. They're not legally able to accept your cash. Interesting. You cannot go and buy a car now for $12,000 and pay cash for it. You have to use the banking system. And it's the same with Bitcoin. You cannot make a transaction with Bitcoin that is over $10,000. You must go through the banking system. This is all being done under the guise of curtailing criminal activity and combating money laundering and all that sort of stuff. But really what it is doing is just expanding the criminal activity of the crime gang masquerading as the Australian government. And it's part of Scott Morrison's push to eliminate cash. And the war against cash is essentially a war against freedom. It's a war against people, because without cash there is no freedom. Once it becomes all digital and it gets pushed into a social crediting system, then the government is able to dictate what people can and cannot buy, who can and cannot buy whatever, and basically they're able to dictate every single aspect of people's lives, and that's where all this is heading to, folks. You know, we can see the rollout of the social crediting system in Darwin with the smart city coming online in Darwin. We can see the push for 5G, which they need to run the whole Internet of Things and have all the bandwidth to do this. And now we can see through the elimination of cash that Scott Morrison is pushing towards, it's all moving towards this same social crediting system. They've also made changes to their facial recognition and surveillance legislation as well, folks, giving themselves far broader powers. Australia really is leading the way in world totalitarian police states, and it's a very, very unnerving and very dangerous thing to be seeing unfolding in this country. But there are a couple of articles regarding this, folks. There's a video where they discuss this quite extensively, discuss the new economic plan quite extensively. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will put a link below, and I will also put a link below regarding the new surveillance legislation. But that seems to be the new norm, folks. Surveillance, censorship, and the removal of cash. And they're trying to do it all around the world. I mean, they've been reasonably successful with this type of an operation in India. They've certainly got it in place in China. And there's other countries as well, I think Switzerland possibly, or Sweden. There's countries in Europe where they have eliminated cash. They're attempting to do it in the Netherlands. Apparently you're not able to make cash purchases over €1,000 in the Netherlands. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I've heard. And if it isn't the Netherlands, then it certainly is somewhere else in Europe, possibly even France. I mean, somewhere. But they're trying to bring this in all over the world, whereby they're just making it way too inconvenient for people to use cash. And we're seeing censorship taken to the next level all around the world, riding on the back of all of these contrived terror events that we're seeing staged everywhere, or that we have seen staged everywhere, all orchestrated to lead us to a certain point. I'm certainly feeling the pinch of censorship at the moment. Subscribers are being deleted from my YouTube channel. People have to subscribe over and over again. I watch my view count drop rather than climb during the course of the day. People have also commented that they are still unable to download my podcast. This has just happened in the last 3 or 4 months. People have had an incredible difficulty downloading my podcast. They seem to get errors. They don't get it with any other podcast, but they get it with mine. And I'm also getting emails from people now saying they are unable to access certain areas on my website. Some of my movies they're trying to download, they find they can't download them. They get a 404 error message when they attempt to download the movie, which they shouldn't be getting because the movie is there. So this is kind of how they do it, folks. They kind of just brush the truth aside. They don't just out and out block and delete and ban and remove people that they want to eliminate from the equation. They just kind of quietly brush them aside. Now, they won't just ban them, because when they ban something, they do that because generally they want people to look at it. You know, people notice when there's an instant ban against someone, and they always run to see what the ban was about. I mean, sometimes they'll ban things they don't want you to see, but generally they ban things because they want you to look in that direction. And that's certainly not what they're doing with me. They're just kind of making it impossible for people to be able to find my work, or to be able to download my work, or to be able to access my movies from my website, or get my podcasts, or any of that sort of stuff. So just kind of quietly brushing the truth aside and sweeping it under the carpet so no one notices it. But as I've said before, folks, if you do want to get hold of my podcast, if you do want to listen to the MP3s of the show, you can go to the website, click the face to enter, click Radio Archives, and when you get in there, you will see podcasts next to the latest show. You can just right-click that, and you can download the show as an MP3. If you just click it, it will open in your browser, and it will simply play in your browser. If you right-click it and select Save As, then you can download the file. Or you can click through to the page that the video file is on. You can watch it on YouTube. Or you can, again, on that page, also click the MP3 link at the bottom of the page, and you can download the show as an MP3. And that will play on any MP3 player. So if you're having trouble getting it from iTunes, that is the place to get it. I don't personally use iTunes myself, so I have no idea how the whole iTunes things work. Someone has been uploading the podcasts for me, but again, people are now getting errors with my podcasts, and they've been unable to download them for at least the last 3 months or so. So yeah, that's a way you can still get the MP3s. You can go to the website, you can download them direct from the website. And again, folks, it's easy to do this. Just follow the procedures that I just outlined for you. And there's nothing to subscribe to. There's nothing to buy. You don't have to purchase the MP3s or anything like that. You know, it's important for people to understand that that's really what all this is about. And even when you look at the YouTube movement, the activist movement, or the truth movement, or the freedom movement, or whatever you want to call it on YouTube, it's important to understand that that's what it's about. It's freedom. You know, people bring you information just to keep you informed, but it's up to people to do something with this information. You know, you can't just be assimilating information and be listening to the spy novel version of reality and thinking, oh, geez, it's all very covert and intriguing. You know, it's about sharing information and motivating people into action on their own turf, you know, motivating people to stand up for their own freedom all around the world. That's what we need to do. That's what this is about. That's what this whole so-called truth movement is about, folks. It's about informing people and motivating them into action. You know, if it's not about motivating people into action, then what is it all for? I mean, you don't just come onto YouTube and come and do these radio shows because you want to be a guru. I mean, that's certainly not why I do it. I do it because it needs to be done. That's why I've never monetized anything. I've never let money get in the way. I've wanted people to see that this is not about economics. It's about freedom. And we really are coming down to the wire, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, the shows have probably seemed a little desperate lately, Some people might think it's just like a broken record just screaming out all of this stuff about 5G and social crediting and all the stuff that's coming down, censorship. But it's because it's really coming down to the wire. It's really snowballing at the moment. And, as I said, I'd like to get back onto history, and I'm going to do that next week. I'm actually going to put all this aside. I'm going to bring you a show on history next week just because I want to do it. But as I said, I've been wanting to do this for months, but in the face of what is coming, it's very, very difficult to ignore what is coming and to just pretend it's all going to go away and talk about history and talk about other things, when in another 12 months, if we don't deal with this, we're simply not going to have the freedom to research history or research any of the stuff we want to look at, and we're certainly not going to have the freedom to talk about it. And what you're going to see is people just quietly dropping offline, people becoming more and more obscure and then quietly disappearing, as with what's happening to me. You're going to see this happening to more and more people, folks. As voices begin to make a difference, they're going to be pushed aside. They won't be blocked and banned outright so that you notice. They'll just be quietly swept under the rug, and then when nobody's looking, these people will simply disappear into the credit system or into the smart prison system or however they want to do it. And that's the thing, the social crediting system and the smart system that's coming has the potential to just kind of pick people off along the way. Anybody who is not complying with government regulations, anybody who's thinking outside the box, anybody who has made a life for themselves outside the system will simply not be able to function anymore within this world. Not if they have to purchase anything, because they simply won't be able to purchase anything if they're not part of the system, if they're not registered as part of the system. This is the way it is in China. If you arrive in China and you don't make yourself part of the system, then you're unable to purchase. You've got to have a smartphone, you've got to have QR codes on your smartphone, you've got to do all of this sort of stuff in order to walk into stores to get a bottle of water. And that's the way they want to make it all around the world. So in that sort of a scenario, people who are independent will no longer have a place to be. They simply won't be able to survive within this system, because even no matter how independent you are, you've still got to go and buy things. I mean, you've still got to go and buy fuel for your car or tools for your garden or whatever. There's still things that you have to go and purchase. You can't be completely independent of this system. You only can to a certain degree, but you still have to participate in certain ways. And they're making sure that in order to participate even in the tiniest way, you must be part of the system. You must be registered as part of the system, and you must be receiving your social credit scores. This is the way they're pushing it, folks. Very, very dystopian, and certainly not any type of reality that is going to serve humankind, which again raises the spectre of the question of who really created this system. Who's responsible for this, and where are we ultimately going? Well, we can see where we're ultimately going, and it's not a good place. But the question is, who created it? Because how is there even any section of humankind which is going to benefit from this system? I mean, you may look at it and think, well, the banking cartels will benefit from it. You may even think, well, the Jewish money changers will benefit from it. But ultimately, you get past all of that, and nobody will benefit from this system. This system is designed to assimilate everything that is mankind into a incredibly dystopian machine-like society where every aspect of human activity and even every aspect of human thought and human consciousness is controlled and dictated and monitored by an AI system. And this is not good, folks. I mean, even the bankers and even the Jewish cartels and whoever you want to blame, I can't see how anything that is human actually benefits from this system coming online at all. But, again, the whole thing is coming online simply because we participate in it. We continue to do it. Even when they roll out this legislation, this new cashless legislation, they want to start eliminating cash, it's because we do it. People just go and use their cards when they go shopping. If they didn't go and use their cards, if everyone started going back to cash and using cash for everything they did, then the government wouldn't have any choice. They wouldn't be able to roll this out, because if we don't use it, then it can't work. That's the problem, is that people just use it all the time. People think it's convenient, but it's not convenience, folks. It's slavery. It's monitoring. It's using convenience to lead you into this incredible dystopian future under the guise of helping you out and making your life simpler, but it's not. It's making your life far more complicated. And as I said, it's all about surveillance, next level surveillance. That's all of what this is about. That's all of what 5G is ultimately about. That's all of what social crediting is ultimately about. It's all of what the whole cash-free society is all about. That's what all these terror events are staged for, folks. They're all manufactured by government just to get you to go along with this and just to get you to buy into all this under the guise of keeping you safe from the terrible terrorists, which is all the government doing the whole thing. I guarantee, folks, every single mass shooting or terror event that you see on this earth, the government has a hand in every single one of them, because you can't just go and do these things. Not without help. You certainly can't do anything like we've seen in any of these events without a major amount of help from some very, very powerful people. It's all been theatre, it's all been contrived, and it's all been designed to lead us exactly where they're leading us into. So that's why we do this, folks, just to alert people to this. And now is the time. You've got to stand up. People have to stand up. This is why I wonder if it's even worth me coming and doing these radio shows. I mean, what's the point of coming onto the show and just telling people this every week if they're not actually going to do anything about it? You know, and sometimes I wonder if I'm just lulling people into a sense of complacency with the stuff I say on the shows, because I don't want to do that. But sometimes I think people are just waiting to hear the shows every week because they want to hear what the state of the world is. But then after they've heard the show, they just go back to work and go back to still supporting the same system. I mean, I know a lot of people don't. I mean, I know a lot of people actually take a lot of this on board, and a lot of people have changed their lives. A lot of people have made positive action in their own community. But, you know, just those who aren't, I just wonder why. You know, those who hear the shows and hear the message but don't actually put it into action, I wonder why. I wonder what it is that they're hoping for, if not freedom, and why they would ever believe that freedom can come from anybody apart from themselves. You know, it's an internal thing. You know, freedom is ultimately a sense of self-worth. And once you have that, it doesn't go away. It's just this spark that grows and grows into this huge fire inside you. And it isn't self-worth like, you know, an ego type of self-worth. It isn't anything like a sense of entitlement. It's just a knowledge of who and what you are. The power of being a human being alive in the world today, and what we could do if people were to realize this power in themselves and rekindle this power in themselves and stand up and say no. And that's all I've been encouraging for the whole time I've been on air. Nearly 12 years now, I've just been encouraging people to stand up and say no. Enough is enough. We're not going to do this. We're going to take the world in another direction now, because we've finally figured out that you're all criminals and you're manufacturing all this stuff, all these terror events and all these things that you do. The whole thing is staged, folks, and it's so important that people get motivated to make some change here. It really is. You know, the future that's unfolding for our children is not going to be a future that we want to have for our children. And if we don't change it, and nobody else is going to, because the kids don't have any reference point for what freedom looks like. There's even a video that I saw recently. It was a young girl, and it was something like the group to blame for all of our problems. And this was a very intelligent young girl who went through this whole rave about why the world is all messed up. And then she blamed it on boomers. She blames the whole thing on baby boomers and completely drops the ball and does not comprehend the fact that it's not about baby boomers, it's not about any generation. She's just promoting the generation gap, as we were all programmed to do, as I did when I was a kid as well. But that's just what she's doing, because that's the program, and what it's really about is psychopaths. The psychopaths who run the world, who train other psychopaths to follow in their footsteps, and so the next group of generational psychopaths takes their place. What we have here is a multinational, multi-generational criminal cabal masquerading as government that has been doing so for a very, very long time. Generation after generation, they bring their own children into it to take over the reins and continue pushing the world in the same direction. It's got nothing to do with boomers, folks. What it is got everything to do with is psychopaths. And one of the real problems we have in trying to combat this situation is people doing exactly what this young girl's done and attempting to blame one particular generation or one particular group of society for the problems and not realizing that it is those who control the system right at the very core. And it's these people who've controlled it for so long, and they've done this over generation after generation. They've just continued to control humankind, lead humankind in the wrong direction, and continue to play people off against each other so that people blame another section of society rather than those who actually control the society. And it isn't because the people sitting in the big chairs happen to be a certain age at the moment, because, hey, that's just what happens as you age. As you get older, you reach a certain age, and then you become in a certain category of whatever generation, but it's got nothing to do with the generation. I mean, look at Justin Trudeau in Canada. He's certainly not a boomer, and he is a huge part of the problem. And it's the same with Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand and all sorts of people, folks, all of these politicians. I mean, that's the problem, is the politicians. If you're a politician, you're a parasite. It's a prerequisite. The problem isn't boomers. The problem is the political system and the parasitic infection in that political system. That's the problem. The world is run by criminal parasites, and all we do is seek to fob the blame off onto certain sections of society, rather than looking in the mirror and realizing that this whole system continues simply due to our participation in this system. And that's really the crux of the biscuit, folks. It doesn't matter what generation you belong to. If you are participating in the smart system by continuing to use your credit card, by continuing to use a smartphone for all these things that people use them for, and you're continuing to support this whole move towards a cash-free society, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can go and blame anybody you like. You can blame the politicians. You can blame whatever generation you like. You can blame the banking cartels. You can blame the Jews, blame the Freemasons, blame the ETs, blame whoever you want. But ultimately, it's our participation in the system which is causing the entire thing. If people would stop doing this, then we'd change the world in a day. As I've said so often, if people could just rediscover themselves, we'd change the world in 3 seconds if they could just do that. And that's why, you've got to look at this whole movement and wonder what it's for. This constantly bringing information to people. I mean, how much information do people need before they're prepared to do something about the situation the world is in? How much information do they need before they're prepared to actually stand up and do something about their lives? Why do people just want more and more information? I mean, don't they see the state the world is in by now? With all the stuff that I've brought people over the years on air, and all the stuff that many people have brought people over the years on air, we can see now. People can see the world's all messed up. They can see that this group of criminals have got control of the reins of society. The question is, what do we do about it? And this is the thing. Everyone wants a game plan. Well, what's your big plan for freedom, Max? But this is what causes so much of the problem, because they want some plan. They think, even if someone implements a plan, well, it's going to be a political maneuver. We're going to be able to sit back and watch Max change the world, or watch whoever is implemented whatever change the world. They don't see that they need to participate. And should they just participate in their own lives and participate and pay attention to what they're doing with their own actions every day? That is the movement. That is what will change the world. There isn't any political ideology. There isn't any type of new system that anyone can come along, the Venus Project or whatever. There isn't anything that anyone can offer you that's going to fix the world if you're not prepared to change the way you interact with the world yourself. Because it is this daily interaction which is leading us into this whole smart system. Even with the politicians doing what they're doing, I mean, ScoMo moving towards a cashless grid and all this sort of stuff, cashless society, to him it's probably just, it looks more efficient to him on the books. And if you're a psychopath running an economically based political system, well, sure, you don't want tax dodgers, you don't want anything going unmonitored, you want to be able to know everything everybody's doing, because that's just the way your mind thinks. But it is the system itself that is the problem. These politicians, these parasites that do all this, they probably don't even realize on a deeper level how dystopian it's going to be, or maybe they do. Maybe they're just all completely in on it together, or maybe they're just allowing their own egos to dictate their actions because, hey, they've got the big chair, they're getting the big paycheck, and they just want to be seen as someone who helped make the system more efficient because they believe that's a good thing. It all comes down to how people think and what their mentality is and what their education has been. That's why you can't even blame some of these major groups that do all these really bad things, because a lot of them don't even know what the group is doing. It's just the perspective they've got and the way they're looking at the world from that perspective. The way I've always said with the Israelis and the Palestinians, you can't blame so many of the Israelis for what they do, because they're born into that reality and they're trained to think in that way. And many of them genuinely believe that their country is constantly under threat from Palestinian terrorists all the time. This is just the way they're trained to think. A lot of the people in Israel who are subject to all of these incredible dystopian realities, do so because you got old women who've got to climb down to air raid shelters in the middle of the night and stuff, but it's their government which is putting off the air raid sirens. It's their government which is running Hamas and getting them to send rockets over. So the people of Israel are under as much terrorism from their own government as what the people of Palestine are. But it is this terrorism which is inflicted upon them which causes them to hate the Palestinians. I mean, it's just this incredibly twisted dichotomy we've got going on there. But you can understand why people do the things they do, and it's all because of the programming that they've had. It doesn't matter what section of society you're in. Most people are programmed to think the way they think. The words and the realities and everything that they're given are not their own. Most people are educated by an education system which doesn't educate them, it indoctrinates them, and they're trained to think certain things. I got a friend who was talking the other day about a friend of his who comes from the football hooligan mentality culture in Liverpool in England. And he was just saying, well, yeah, I grew up to be a football hooligan because that's just what I was, because that's just what you did. Because my brother was a football hooligan and my dad was a football hooligan and his dad was a football hooligan. And you get taken to the game and your dad points at the guys in the other colours and he tells you that we hate those people, and then you start flicking coins at each other, then you start sharpening the coins and flicking sharp coins at each other, then you start beating each other up, and it just becomes this culture and it's this mentality that you grow up into because it's the way you've been trained to think. So who do you blame? Do you blame the football hooligans? Or do you blame the people who trained them to think that way? Or do you blame the society itself for allowing this to even happen and creating a situation where people would even think this way? I mean, it's pretty crazy when you think about it, but you take everything away from people and you squash their mentality and you push them into this little box, then you give them a certain team to associate themselves with, so it enkindles this tribal mentality within people, and it's a good way of controlling people. It gives them an outlet. It's like a pressure relief valve, and that's what a lot of these games are for. That's what action movies are for. That's what a lot of the stuff that we see in the world today is for, folks. Is to create this pressure relief valve, because otherwise this society would have imploded years ago and we very likely would have pulled these criminal parasites out of power and taken the world in a different direction. But anyway, I think we've reached break time here, folks, so I better leave it there for now. We'll go and have a break. Thank you for joining me on the air today. It's always a pleasure to have your company, and I'll be back to speak to you again in a few minutes. And welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. So as I mentioned earlier, I do want to get back to history sometime very soon. I intend to bring you some stuff about history next week, just to kind of break things up. I really would like to get back onto that topic. It is what got me started on this journey, after all, back when I was like 8 years old. It's what caused me to really start questioning things. And something that I've come across, actually, a friend of mine who lives in Brisbane, a member by the name of Chance Gardner, has been working with another friend of his, a member by the name of Brad Clausen. And they've discovered some remarkable stuff in regard to the human brainstem in relation to ancient artwork. Really, really quite incredible stuff, folks. The things we've been looking at lately, and looking at ancient Tartaria and looking at how the world was very, very different to what we believe it was not too long ago. What he's discovered is that many of the statues that you find around Karnak, many of the statues in Egypt, even the Egyptian headdresses, and even some of the ancient depictions of some of the Venuses that we find around the world, such as the Venus of Willendorf, are actually depicting human brainstems and are actually relating to levels of consciousness within the human condition. But this was very much recorded through ancient artworks, and a lot of the stuff that we're seeing around the world may not be depicting what we think it's actually depicting. There are messages that have been left in there for future generations so that we will realize the importance of what a lot of these ancient cultures were trying to show us. And it seems that a lot of ancient cultures were based on this knowledge. And I do intend to get Chance on the show sometime soon and come and discuss some of this. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to get Brad Clausen on the show at such short notice, but I do definitely intend to have Chance on to talk about this. And if you are watching this on YouTube, I will put a link below to a couple of videos you can go and watch. The series is entitled Magical Egypt, and I'm not sure if it's all complete yet. I know that they have had a premiere on Facebook the other day. Unfortunately, I missed that. I was busy. But it is some pretty remarkable research that does tie into all of the things we've been looking at regarding Tartaria and regarding the fact that there was a very, very different culture that existed on this earth not too long ago. So that's something I want to get into as well. Yeah, and when you look at all this stuff, folks, it becomes pretty apparent why they've made such an incredible effort to lock us down and why they are moving this into such an incredibly regimented digital type regulated society, which is so incredibly alien to human consciousness, so incredibly opposite to human consciousness. You know, we've been led into a society where all creative potential is being removed from the human condition, where you're simply not going to be allowed to think anything that the government doesn't want you to think. So therefore, you're not going to be able to create anything the government doesn't want you to create. We're going to see no development of genius, no development of free expression, no development of new forms of art, new forms of anything. You know, it's kind of like the human race getting in this position where you think, oh, look, we've already done it all now. There's nothing new that could possibly be invented. Because I actually said this back in the 1800s and the 1900s, that we've done it all now. There's nothing new could possibly be invented. And look where we are now. You know, so, but you're taking all this away from the human condition. You're taking all type of personal input away from people's lives by moving them into this digital reality. And what we see in the rediscovery of ancient Tartaria and in this new discovery by Chance Gardner and Brad Clausen of this brainstem depictions in ancient artwork and how much consciousness was featured in ancient artwork and how much consciousness was made a focus of all types of ancient texts that we can find. But it really does begin to go a long way to explaining why we are moving so far away from that with everything that we're doing with this digital reality that's being rolled out. The question is, how do we stop it? You know, how do we stop it? Well, half of the battle, folks, is, as I've said, making people aware of the information, just helping people become aware of the information, talking about things, asking questions. And when politicians roll out this legislation, we don't actually just have to go along with it. We could say no. And if they say, well, no, you're not able to do that, we're going to make you do it, well, we'll form our own societies and we'll do things our own way without them. We don't need to participate in their reality if we don't want to, folks. That's the thing. You know, there is a choice. The problem is that people just don't believe they have one because they have no faith in themselves and they have no real respect or rapport with the people around them. So if they do step outside the box, they're afraid no one's going to step outside of the box with them, and generally nobody will because they've never developed these relationships with the people around them. They've never put common unity into their community, which is something that I've been suggesting for the last 12 years. It's kind of interesting looking at all this, you know, because all of the solutions that we've got, I mean, these are things that I suggested 12 years ago when I first came on air, 11 or 12 years ago. And now I see the situation the world is in now. And if people had put these plans into effect back then when I first suggested that they do it, if they'd got themselves self-sufficient and put gardens in when I suggested they had, if they had developed rapport with the local community around them and built that respect for the people around them so they could all stand up together now, then they would be a force to be reckoned with. But it's got to the point now that, you know, we're back kind of at the wall, folks, and we've got to put this into action now, and we've got to stand up and make our voices heard, or we're just going to go the way we're going, you know, and we're going to end up in the direction that we're headed. You know, and if we can't stop this and we are just going to be rolled into this digital reality, then what we're going to have to do is try to find ways of maneuvering ourselves within it where we can still maintain some sort of sense of freedom. I think the easiest way to do that, folks, would be to get out of the cities. You're certainly not going to have much of a sense of freedom if you're still living in a city once all of this comes online. But the interesting thing, folks, you know, when you look at this and you know, even with what I was saying before, I felt kind of guilty looking at ancient history while all of this smart grid is rolling out because it's important that we pay attention to it. But seeing how it all relates to ancient history as well, you know, when you can really fathom the notion that the world is very different to what we believe it is, that our history is very different to what we believe it is. And when you can really begin to grasp the concept that just a short time ago, as recently as possibly even 200 years ago, there was a very, very different culture that existed on this earth with a very different mental perspective, a very different understanding of what reality is, a very different intellectual focus, even a very different spiritual focus to what we see in the world today. Even the spiritual pursuits that we pursue today are very often pursuits that are external to ourselves. They're not related to our own physiology. Unless, perhaps it's the New Age movement telling you to go within and stay there and not acknowledge the outside world, which doesn't really work either. You've got to marry the two together. But, as I was mentioning earlier, you look at the ancient cultures and the ancient texts and the ancient things we've got, such as, the Vedic text or the Mahabharata or many of the ancient texts that we have, all of them have this relation to consciousness woven within the text, even the Bible, if you want to look at that. It's not just about political situations and not just about physical or geological situations. It's always about human consciousness. It isn't just always about human intellect either. It's about consciousness. And you look at this and you think, well, why? Why was this such a focus? With things such as the Ramayana, you're reading about the great war that happened between the Rama Empire and what we would believe to be the Atlantean Empire. And even woven within those stories is a huge significance placed on human consciousness. All of the great achievements that we see over the histories that we do have, with people such as Buddha or Krishna or even Christ, it was always to do with consciousness. Even the message that Christ was attempting to bring to his followers, it was to do with consciousness. It was to do with shifting your perspective. And it was to do with understanding the power of being human, the power that exists within our own biology, our own physiology, our own mental state, our own intellect, our own perception of what reality is, how powerful these things are if we can marry them all together and get some type of focus. And why it's become so difficult for us to get any focus on these things, why it's so difficult for us to even comprehend these things now, to comprehend these ways of thinking. It's simply because we're not taught these ways of thinking, and I would suggest also because we've had our language changed to the degree that we're not able to convey spiritual understandings to people anymore, not even able to convey them to ourselves because we think in terms of language and we don't have the words within our language to explain the spiritual concepts we're trying to understand, to explain the inner feelings we have, the inner psychological makeup that we have, the deep connection that we feel to things, that something that is there that we don't know how to explain, that we all have. We all have this feeling. And again, it's because we think in language. And the words to explain these things, I would suggest, have been removed from our language very, very deliberately. And even on some of the shows, I've talked about the concept of there being periodic resets. Perhaps civilization is wiped out in a cyclic manner, and perhaps we are further reduced in our spiritual and intellectual prowess with each reset. Whether that happens or whether it doesn't, it's all speculative. Maybe there's only been one reset. Maybe there was just been some event where the world that was here was wiped out and then it was replaced by this parasitic culture we've got now. It's difficult to know whether this has happened once or more than once or whether it's an ongoing thing. But looking at what we've got now in relation to what we had and looking at the way this culture is being molded, it becomes very, very interesting because you can see that there is a deliberate dumbing down and removal of any type of real spiritual connection that's being carried out against the people of this earth now on a mass scale, and it's happening right around the world. Simply by the shifting of priorities within people, the shifting of perspectives within people, and the subtle and gradual changing of people's language. This is having a huge impact on people as well. I think the change in people's language is extremely important. Because as I said, if you change people's language and you remove certain words from their language that explain certain spiritual concepts, then how can they even ever understand these concepts? How can they even be aware that these concepts exist? How can they ever understand the inner feelings that they have if there are no words to describe them? And an interesting thing as well, looking at Tartaria and looking at the loss of information regarding this culture and looking at this culture we have now. What would happen if the culture that we've got now was to be just wiped out, if there was to be a cataclysm and something was to happen? How would people know what happened? Most of the people in the world today aren't writing things down. They're using scrying mirrors and, the internet to write all this stuff down. But even those people who write books, generally the most commonly accepted language in the world today is English. And look at the English language. It's a very, very peculiar language. And not only is it a peculiar language, but it's undergone certain changes over the years which have succeeded in making it even more peculiar. For example, look at the spelling of words in English. None of the words in English, or very few of the words in English, are actually spelt phonetically. Very strange. Words like enough, O-U-G-H. Why does O-U-G-H signify the word enough? Why does it work for cough or rough or through or dough? How can you have dough, through, enough and cough all spelt the same way, O-U-G-H? And we have words with silent letters. We have words such as yacht, Y-A-C-H-T. And it's really, phonetically, it's Y-O-T. So why are words spelt this way, and why do we have so many different spellings for the same word, and why do we have the same word that has so many different meanings? Look at the word through. You threw a ball or you walk through a door. Both sounds the same, both spelt differently. And yet when you walk through a door, that O-U-G-H is also applicable to all sorts of other sounds as well. So, when we look at ancient cultures and we look at the sort of translations we do with ancient cultures, looking at hieroglyphs and this sort of things, there are certain hieroglyphs and certain words and certain vowels and certain letters that have certain meanings, and we can apply those meanings to them. We can figure out what's being said. But look at the English language. It's going to be very, very difficult for people who come after to ever figure out the rules of English, to know how O-U-G-H means something different depending on the context of the word, to know how you've got different words that sound the same that are spelt differently, different words that are spelt the same that sound different. When you look at it, it's almost a language which is designed to bring out the intellectual side of people and to make sure that all of that intelligence is lost in translation of the language for anybody who comes after, who seeks to find out what we were actually talking about. If the books are written in English, then they're not really going to have much of a hope in hell of finding out what we were talking about, folks. Might be why we have languages now like the Rondo that people cannot translate. I think that's what English is going to be like for people who come in the future. There'll be certain words that can be translated, but there'll be others that are simply impossible to understand because none of the words in English are spelled phonetically, well, very, very few of them anyway. And when you look at it, it's almost as if it's been mathematically designed to be the most confusing language you could possibly create. You have to wonder why that is. Another thing that's also had me wondering is places such as Hollywood. We look at the ancient stories of Hollywood, wood from the holly tree being used to make magic wands used for mind control. And we think, well, maybe that's why they named Hollywood Hollywood, because they were naming it after the magic wands. But then you have to wonder whether they named the magic wands or used Hollywood to make the magic wands because they remembered that the influence Hollywood had over the world. Whether time is cyclic and whether they've done this over and over again. We do find remnants of ancient cultures. We've found remnants of ancient civilizations, reasonably recent ancient civilizations. I use the word ancient lightly, but civilizations that have existed through the Florida Everglades and areas where there's power poles and looks like canal estates and things that look like we have in our modern societies that have been there and have existed as recently as a couple of hundred years ago and have just sort of fallen into decay. We're finding places like this around the world as well. And you wonder about places such as Hollywood. Hollywood is an interesting place because for all of its downside and all of the evil that comes out of Hollywood and the manipulation of the minds of the masses, Hollywood also is this incredible magnet for intelligentsia and creative and artistic people, simply because we've got an economically based world and you've got to pay to be alive. And if you go to Hollywood and you get that one break, just 1 minute, 5 minutes, you can make this fortune that will last you the rest of your life. It's just like this huge diamond that's shining there for people, and they know that if they're creative, all they've got to do is get noticed just that once and get that one break, and they're going to be set for life. And so it draws all of these incredibly creative people there. And of course, Hollywood just uses them and eats them up and spits them out and chews them up and throws them away. Some people get it. Some people make a bit of a fortune. They usually turn into a puppet for the Illuminati and get used to program the masses. And most of the rest of the people get discarded. But by the same token, it still draws them all in. Now, something that I noticed when I was in LA from the times that I've spent there is the amount of creative people that I've met. You know, almost everybody that you meet has a talent of some kind, because almost everybody you meet was drawn to Los Angeles because of the attraction of Hollywood and the possibility of getting that one break that could set them up for the rest of their lives. You know, I've been walking down Santa Monica Beach, down the boulevard there, and I see homeless people playing grand piano that is comparable to anyone you would see in Carnegie Hall. People doing juggling acts, and artistic people and singers, and just you name it, folks. Some of the most creative people on earth all get drawn to that place, and they end up stuck in this bubble, stuck in this little grind that they can't get out of. I guarantee most of the homeless people that you see in LA are incredibly creative people that simply cannot function in an economic society, and so they get discarded by that society. And you look at something like, you know, Los Angeles, where it's situated with the San Andreas Fault, and we're waiting for the big earthquake and all that sort of a thing. Wouldn't that be an interesting way to run things as well? To have these resets happening, or even just one reset happened, and then to have this area on Earth, which is one of the most unstable and the most easily controlled, and then turn it into a drawstone for all of the world's creativity. All of the people who have expression, who have something to offer, make it something that would attract these people and draw them all to that area. So then you can just wipe out that area in the next cataclysm or whatever, and suddenly all of that intelligentsia disappears from the human experience, all disappears from the human gene pool, and with the next reset, the human race just became a little bit dumber. All those creative and artistic people just got wiped out in that last cataclysm, and so now we can start again, and we can create another situation, another Hollywood-type place that will attract all the most intelligent and creative people of that cycle and bring them into an area where they can all be easily controlled and contained as well. You know, whether it's a cataclysm, whether it's simply with the legislation that they put in California. I mean, all the freedom that you see about California, yeah, the great place of freedom, hippie revolution, all this sort of stuff, you go to California, the legislation that they've got in that place is absolutely through the roof. It is the most controlled and repressive place in the entire United States as far as legislation goes. It just doesn't look that way on the surface. So it's kind of interesting when you look at all this, folks, and you kind of wonder how they play it, and you kind of wonder whether it's a deliberate play or whether it just happens that way. But, you know, I see a lot of this in Los Angeles, and I see a lot of this around the world. A lot of people are just attracted to that place. A lot of people really believe that they will get that one break if they go there. And if they're going to get a break anywhere, that's the place they can do it. And you've got to wonder whether that is done by design, folks, and whether it's done simply to draw all those creative people there so they can be, as I said, easily controlled and perhaps removed from the human experience to dumb us down a little bit more for the next cycle. I just wonder about this sort of stuff sometimes. I mean, highly speculative, of course, but, you know, you have to wonder. It's an interesting thing when you look at it. But, you know, it's happening right around the world. Everybody is drawn to this sort of place, and everyone is drawn to the flash and pizzazz of technology, and it is the technology that's leading us into this dystopia. And it's happening everywhere. It's happening in the jungle. It's happening in third world countries. You can go to the jungle in Peru. You can go to the Philippines. Go to some of these incredibly poor cultures. And kids may not have a decent home to live in. They may be living in a tin shelter or whatever, but they'll still have the latest cell phone. And they'll still judge you by what sort of model cell phone you have. You know, they generally judge people by the tech, and through the tech, they are drawn to places with the brightest lights and the brightest technology. They're all drawn to Hollywood, that sort of Hollywood mentality anyway. and they're all drawn into this system. We've seen a huge breakdown even in the family units in places like the Philippines through the technology. They've done it differently in our cultures. They did it gradually. They had to do it gradually, through the breakdown of the family unit through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and leading us into the generation gap and all the stuff they've done. But once it was all in place in Western cultures, all they really needed to do was introduce that mentality and introduce the technology into third world cultures to be able to lead them into it a lot quicker than the way they did with us. They kind of practiced with us, and they got the methodology worked out, and they got it refined. But once it was refined and they had the technology in place, all you need is the tech to be able to put it in place in other countries. This is why when you go around the world, you go to the third world, you notice the third world is around about 20 or 30 years behind the Western world. But it isn't just in the development, it's also in the mentality and the technology, and even the toys the kids are using. You go to Peru, you notice all the toys that they're using in Peru are all toys that were discarded by the United States 30 years ago, and that is the current pop culture in Peru. It's about 30 years behind the United States as far as Transformers and Batman and all of this sort of stuff that kids are playing with, toys they're playing with. These are all toys the kids were playing with back in the 80s and 90s in Australia and America and all these sort of places. And then whatever didn't sell, they moved into the third world and they introduced that mentality through them, and they gradually lead them into the same social crediting system, which is all based on this whole smart technology. And it's coming in every country, folks. That's the thing. It's every single country. A lot of people will write to me and they say, where's a safe place to go, Max? And folks, if I knew, I would probably be there. And it's difficult because wherever you go, it's not your home is the thing. Home is where the heart is, and there's a real truth in that saying, because no matter where I've gone around the world, my heart is still in Australia, and no matter what they do to this place, I don't want to have to leave this country to simply go somewhere to be safe. I would prefer that the people of this country simply stood up for themselves and said, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. Enough is enough. It's getting people away from the tech long enough for them to realize this is the problem. If people could just pull their eyes away from the television, pull their eyes away from their cell phones, pull their heads out of this economic model that they're forced to comply with all the time. People are so busy running on the treadmill that they just don't get time to look around them. And even when they do have time, they don't want to look around them. They don't want to know. They just want to have some time to relax, because most people are too terrified to find out what's really going on in the world, because if they know, it may mean that they have to do something about it. And if they don't do something about it, well, they might feel a little bit uncomfortable about themselves, and they don't want that. They just want it all to go away. Just leave me be. Let me get through life. I'm in a position where this works for me. Leave me alone. That is unfortunately the attitude of most people. But they don't realize that the reason they feel that way is because life is a grind, and it's getting harder, and it's getting harder and harder. So they need to maintain focus so they can get through. But it's just going to keep getting harder and harder because they think that they need to maintain focus so they can just get through. When if they stopped and said, hey, I've just realized we don't actually have to do any of this, and that the world is run by criminals and all of the hardship I'm suffering is being done by design, then they would find that they actually can get through. It's people's unwillingness to look at the reality of the world which is really causing a huge part of the problem. And if people would simply tear their eyes away from the grind and realize the beauty of themselves and the power that they have to actually change things, we could change things. And that's been the frustrating part through all of this, through the shows over the years, is just seeing how simple it would be to change the world and how ill-prepared many people are to do it. That's all I've ever done, folks, is try to encourage people to do that. Try to encourage people to be themselves, to discover themselves, and to stand up for themselves. And all I can do is offer you perspectives, and hopefully it will lead towards that goal. And that's been my main agenda and my main objective since starting this show 11 or 12 years ago, folks, just to help people find themselves, because once they do that, they can really discover what freedom means. And once they do that, then we can all be free. And won't that be a wonderful place to be? As I've often said, folks, I just want to be free, and I can't be free until you're free. And so I do everything I can to try to encourage that within people. But once again, folks, we have now reached that time of the day where we've now reached the end of the show. It really does seem to come around quick sometimes. Thank you very much for joining me on the air today. As I've mentioned previously, I will be speaking at an event here on the Gold Coast called the Paradigm Shift Summit that is happening on the 16th and 17th of this month here in Surfers Paradise. I'll look forward to seeing you there. I'll also be speaking at Anarchadelphia, which is happening on the 17th of September in Philadelphia. I'm also speaking at a gathering in Mount Shasta, which is the Earth Avatar Gathering, I think it's called. And I will be speaking at Acapulco in Mexico in February next year. If you'd like to get a ticket to Anarchadelphia, you can use the coupon Crowhouse and you'll get yourself a discount to that ticket. If you want to get a ticket to Acapulco, you can go to my website, thecrowhouse.com. You can click the banner and go through that entry point, and you'll get yourself a 10% discount on that ticket as well. As always, I'd like to send out a thank you to those many people who send me so many kind emails. I am getting through them, which is really good, and an enormous thank you to those people who support me on Patreon. As I've so often said, I could not do any of this work were it not for your support, so I cannot thank you enough for that. That is it for me, folks. As I said, I will be bringing you some stuff on history next week, and I do intend to have Chance Gardner and hopefully Brad Clawson on the show to discuss their findings in relation to consciousness and ancient Egypt and ancient artwork and some of the stuff they've found out recently, which I think all ties in with Touch Area quite nicely. I'll be attempting to bring you some of that information very, very soon. But until then, folks, I will look forward to speaking to you again next week. Please do take very good care until then. In Litecoin.